Is off now. There we go. Let there be light.
Let there be light. Boy, lots to dive into today. I mean, first of all, we had a very interesting chat with a journalist from the Cayman Islands who's very tapped into the source there in the Cayman Islands, the national team, everything to do with Cayman Islands sports. So obviously, you might not have time to check that out before the game, but even after the game, I think a lot of the stuff he said was quite relevant, quite interesting to learn about the future of Cayman Islands football as a whole and what this game really meant or means for them. But obviously, when you listen, it might be what it meant for them. So check that out. But without further ado, do we want to dive into lineup right away off the bat? Because we're coming in hot with a heavily rotated squad today.
Yeah, I mean, I like it. We get to see Theo get a start, right? Which is obviously nice.
Corpino, that
And
is.
yes, not the Theo we're normally talking about on the show, but Max getting a start. I mean, that's good to see. I'm excited for this lineup. Mark Anthony K getting in there, Stirring as well, which we haven't really seen a
First
lot
cap.
of. So yeah, and obviously getting Davies again is sick. We love to see that.
It almost feels like just looking at this lineup. It's like Davies, Laird, and their kids kind of in a vibe, in a way. It's just like you got Davies is there, and you got everyone with them, and I mean obviously from a pure like non-nuanced standpoint, Mark Anthony K is the usual starter, so it feels a bit weird to lump him in with the rotated squad, but
You need
that
that good mix, right?
same with Samuel Piet, but that just shows Canada's depth in midfield. But you look other way up front, Liam Miller and Theo Corbinu, pair youngsters up front, always good to see. Always, hopefully they can be in and amongst the goals today against the Cayman Islands, and then someone like Alistair Johnston, Frank Stirring, two youngsters at the back, and they're still experienced in that lineup. Ricardo Ferreira, we got to see what he's made of. Obviously, not going to be maybe the biggest test for him today, but still a good test nonetheless to see how physically he looks, how he holds up in terms of his knee, because that's certainly a question that many will have because he's obviously all of his knee injuries. And then David Wotherspoon, the 31-year-old, he's been in really good form for St. Johnston and in Scotland. So I'm possibly curious to see if he can find some offense today. But all in all, it was good to find a mix between rotating, but obviously keeping a guy like Davey so you can rack up the goals and set up your teammates and all that.
Yeah, I mean, from our chats with Seaford Russell Jr. of the our Cayman Islands source, it does sound like they're going to be setting up pretty defensively, just try to, bunker and survive and maybe get the odd chance on goal. I think they had about two opportunities to at least put something on target against Suriname and obviously didn't come off, but the mission's pretty clear for those guys. Just, try to make it a decent score line. And as we chatted about with our friend down in the Cayman Islands, if they could somehow manage to net one, in Bermuda-esque fashion, I think that would be a huge coup for them. So that's maybe if you're looking for an ambitious goal for the Cayman Islanders, it would be getting one past Max Crepeau.
Well, I'm happy we did that interview because having like experienced CONCACAF quite, intimately the past few years, I've always found the stories of these smaller nations to be fascinating. For me, one obviously when French Guiana came to BC in 2019, I got to meet a couple media people and their coach and etc. because I speak French and I went to their practice and they were so accommodating, and just hearing the story of football in those countries where it's just for them, they have so much joy in playing these sorts of games and just being out there and playing, and it just makes it so fascinating, and it makes it you almost feel bad at some points when you see those score lines that some of these teams put up. And I'm personally, I'm all for the growth of CONCACAF as a whole, and I'm happy there's things such as Nations League now in this amended World Cup qualifying format that gets them these sort of games where when we were speaking to Seaford, you could see what it meant for the Cayman Islands to play someone like Alphonso Davies. So I think it's really cool, these sorts of games, and it's an underappreciated.
Oh, I don't know if I think Alex got a bit laggy there. Hold on a second. We'll have to see what's going on. We may have lost Alex, but just to kind of continue on. Oh, is he back? Not sure. I think he's still frozen.
Oh,
Alex, Alex, he's back. He's back. But yeah,
I don't know if you caught the end of what I said there,
I
but
didn't. I don't think we did. What were
but
you?
yeah,
Summarize your points there.
I don't know when I cut off, but it was basically about like these island nations and how these games you look at it from a Canadian's perspective, but when you take a step back, it's great to see these nations getting chances to play bigger games in Nations League and World Cup qualifiers. So hopefully the continued growth of CONCACAF can help these nations do bigger things in the future, such as make Gold Cups and give a platform to improve just their domestic league. Because I mean, rifting off of what we talked about, just hearing that they don't have a semi-professional league in the Cayman Islands, let alone a professional one. Like they're literally, it's amateurs versus Bayern Munich Champions League winner pros, and it's just such a fascinating CONCACAF story to follow.
Yeah, and it sounds like the last 3 or 4 years have been a real changing of the guard in terms of the Cayman Islands footballing setup, where it went from, I think you probably had, late 20s, mid 30s players that had been part of the setup for a while, maybe a little bit entitled, not taking it that seriously. And it sounds like this new director of the Football Association has really come in, mixed it up. They've got 16, 17, 18-year-olds in the national team mix because they know these guys are committed. Football is not just something they do on the weekends. It is a legitimate aim to be a professional. They're fully committed to the sport. And so there's going to be growing pains. Like, today could be a 8-9-0, but I think the way the Cayman Islands is viewing it is that's going to be valuable learning experience. And, they prefer to do that than take a forfeit and not give these players the experience and the chance to see what they're aiming towards. So I'm really excited. There's always good layers to these CONCACAF matchups everywhere in the mix, from Canada, Mexico yesterday to, Canada, Cayman Islands today.
Yeah, and it was interesting to hear just the story of how the whole testing snafu happened because, again, like we mentioned, and Seaford, he admitted Cayman Islands more lucky that Canada did need these goals and they want to play this game because for them it was a travel issue, it was an administrative issue. They just couldn't get to the testing center in time. It closed, so they had no option to do the test. They somehow got it open, but it was obviously too late for yesterday. But hopefully, Canada can get the goals they need on one hand, but hopefully it's going to be a valuable experience for the Cayman Islands because, as mentioned, it's almost like the equivalent of a VMSL team cracking up and playing the Canadian national team. So on one hand, you can almost root for them at a certain standpoint.
Well, yeah, do we want to talk a little bit of recap of what happened yesterday? I guess we didn't really. It was the vibes were a little too sad to do a full show. I thought, it was tough. If there had been a goal in it, at least for Canada, I would have felt a little bit better. But obviously, opportunities were limited. And really, as we heard from Biello after the match, it was the moment of that Pantemis error really kind of broke the camel's back because they played a style where everything had to go right. And the moment there was an individual error, the whole game plan sort of broke down. So, Alex, your thoughts on the game plan and how the match played out?
Well, we'll obviously go dive into it more in like a proper episode later this week, recapping this game that's going to happen and obviously yesterday's game. But just looking at what happened, it's frustrating in certain senses. There are positive parts of the game. You can't pretend like it wasn't a good performance from Canada. They battled hard against a team that, there was a bit of a, maybe not a talent discrepancy, but maybe more an experience playing together, that is. But I thought Canada battled well. They defended well. I thought maybe offensively there could have been a bit more. Someone like Theo Bair, again, probably could have been a good focal point to have on top, as Sebastian mentions in the comments here. And just for maybe tactically, yes, defensively they hit on their tactics and it took an individual mistake for them to let Mexico back in the game. But the fact of the matter is, no matter how well you're going to defend, unless you're going for a 0-0, you're going to need a goal either to win or just at least have a chance to drag the game to extra time. And when you generate 3 chances and one of them is straight at the goalkeeper, the other 2 went about flying 20 feet over the goal, you're not going to have much of a chance to win. Just no matter how well you play. And I thought the offensive tactics were disappointing because Mexico's defense didn't look particularly how do I put it, threatened. They didn't look that good. Canada had time, but they didn't recognize that, and they played a little too individualistic at points with the ball. And I think that has to hurt, knowing that had they played to their full potential, they easily could have made a game out of it right to the final whistle.
I think what really hurt for me, and it was stuff that I put in tweets around halftime. Like there was that moment where all the players came together and David Norman Jr. was just standing there like, huh, what are you going to do? And I love that moment. It was fantastic because you could
Great
tell
camaraderie.
The Mexicans wanted no part of Norman. But if you could have kept that up in the second half, and the more it goes into 60th, 70th minute, and the Mexicans are still frustrated and you haven't allowed a goal, that's when Canada was going to have their opportunity. And so it was just that massive like depressurization of the match when Mexico scored. You could tell that all the tension just fell away, and then the Mexicans they played a little more loose and open and comfortable after that. And so yeah, it was tough to see, and I do think especially on the second goal, Derek Cornelius was massively missed. You just need that leader, that organization, someone to bark and say, "Hey, you've got that man." And I think lacking that was definitely felt, especially a goal down too. Cornelius was a guy who could have just calmed the troops a little bit and helped them keep their composure and maybe provided something offensively, because he's buzzing on set pieces all tournament. So that had to be tough for him to sit that one out.
Yeah, well, just one of the things I did mention in my preview of the game is the fact that Mexico is going to feel the pressure of their fans, and for them, they were the favorites. For Canada, a goal for them had to be to get a goal early on, because that would have put all the seeds of doubt in the Mexican team's mind. So you would have liked them to maybe unleash Buchanan, Diaz, and Brim a little more on the counter, just to do that. Because like you said, until that 60th minute goal, Mexico is really starting to play on their heels, and that's never a good sign for favorites to play like that. But again, the James Pantemis era, it's almost poetic that happened after we defended, or at least I defended, Ochoa of the US making a similar mistake. And again, my principles remain the same. Playing out the back is a good thing. There's studies that show that it leads to more goals, it leads to less goals against. It's just, again, awareness of knowing when to play the ball out of the back. I mean, to be honest, it was a missed pass. It wasn't a bad pass. Norman Jr. was open for a quick turn and push up the field. Pantemis misses the pass. Canada doesn't react enough to the transition moment. It's a goal. Those kinds of mistakes happen in football. So it hurts to see it go down like that if you're Canada, but you certainly would have just hoped a little more offensively again. So that mistake wasn't so backbreaking as it was. It really felt like when that went in, it was game over, and you just wish that wasn't the case.
Yeah, and it's a disappointing end result, but I do feel like the tournament was almost decided at the group stage, and the results against Haiti and Honduras not being able to grab more than a single point in those matches. Ultimately, I know we said on the last live show we did that, hey, you still had to face the U.S. or Mexico no matter what. Now, after watching those two matches, it really does feel like there was a significant drop-off between Mexico and the U.S. I mean, the U.S. just didn't show up to play against Honduras. They looked nervous. They looked like they weren't up for the moment. It was a mess, and I guess maybe it wouldn't have felt the same if it was Canada versus the U.S. Maybe the U.S. would have been a little more comfortable, but you can't look at that match and not think what if, in terms of Canada not only having the opportunity to, in a very satisfactory kind of way oust the U.S., but also just genuinely their chances of progressing to the Olympics would have been a lot higher. So in a lot of ways, I feel like the tournament was lost prior to this match yesterday.
Yeah, and it just shows the importance of seeding, because if you're looking, say, between Canada and the U.S., Canada fought so much better than the U.S., and you have to be happy if you're a Canadian fan to see that effort level, that compete level, especially after watching the U.S. The U.S., for whatever reason, they just didn't look like they were bothered to be there. And I don't know if you, Sam, saw Jason Kreis's comments after the game saying along the lines of, you lose more than you win. I don't know if that's the sort of mentality you want professional coaches to be preaching, but It showed on the field last night, yesterday. The U.S. just looked lethargic, and for me, if you're a U.S. fan, that hurts because yes, you're missing players, just like Canada's missing players. Everyone knows that. But there's one thing to be missing players and be undermanned, and there's one thing not to fight to the end, and that's where you have to be happy with Canada. They were short-manned in terms of the players that weren't available. They were short-manned in terms of the players they had in the tournament being injured, especially their captain, their best player, when they fought to the very end. So in terms of mentality, I did mention yesterday that you want to see the compete level, as cliche as it was, and I saw that. So at least that's something good to build off of. But maybe that's a good way to transition to a question from Sebastian from earlier. Because he asked, given the amount of new faces we've seen in the Canadian national team pool, is this the deepest pool of Canadian players we've had in a while? And I think the answer is wholeheartedly yes. And obviously the talent is a big part of that. The CPL, MLS, they've done great strides in that. There's a lot of Canadians playing abroad, but kind of riffing off that, I think commitment's a big thing too. Because even before, when there was talented players, the commitment to travel for your national team wasn't always there. Commitment to play certain games with your national team wasn't there. Now we're seeing players like Alphonso Davies traveling across the world to play in Bradenton at a high school field in Florida. You didn't see that before. So you have to love the commitment. I do think that's a big part of the changing of this national team pool.
Yeah, I mean, totally. Like the expectation. I'm still almost a bit amazed that despite the suspension and all that Alphonso Davies is here playing in these matches, and I'm sure some of the Cayman Islanders, like especially the young guys, have to be thrilled at the prospect of lining up against him. That is, thrilled until they actually have to face him on the pitch. Then they'll probably be regretting it a little
And they
bit
might need an Advil.
as he zooms down the end line past them, or dribbles three midfielders or something like that. So yeah, it says a lot about how far the program's come, and I think even the U23s, despite not being full strength, despite the disappointing results, you can see the progression that's being made, and it's yeah, we're just seeing a whole new era of Canadian men's soccer, which is very exciting.
Well, you just look at the roster today, because I mean, you're already missing Jonathan David. Obviously, wasn't able to be there. Scott Arfield. And then even from last game, Atiba Hutchinson went home. It sounds like Milan Borjan went home. He's not on the bench. So it's Dane Sinclair only if Max Crepeau does need a replacement. But even then, you look at the replacements they're able to offer. You bring Marc-Anthony Kaye off the bench, one of the best midfielders in all of MLS, let alone, Canadian midfielders in all of MLS. You got Alistair Johnston, one of the rookie of the years, a solid right back. Samuel Piet, a really good number 6. Max Crepeau, when he was healthy, one of the best goalkeepers in MLS. Frank Stirring, obviously a young prospect, a lot of potential. Theo Corbinu, such a fascinating prospect. Did it with Liam Miller. Ricardo Ferreira is playing in the Portuguese First Division. That's a pretty good rotation, rotation you're able to undergo there. And even someone like Christian Gutierrez or Joel Waterman, who aren't, two of the players that didn't get rotated in, those are both MLS quality players. Before, if you're rotating to your bench, it just felt like, you just kind of, you almost had to pray a little bit, being like, okay, we got some unattached FC guys. We got some guys who haven't played in about 18 months for their club teams. You're kind of a bit worried, but now Canada's just got this depth, and it's going to show in games like today, hopefully, where they're able to turn to their bench and still get results.
Yeah, I think the question is what's the score line, right? What are we expecting out of this one? And yet, does the Cayman Islands get on the score sheet like Bermuda did?
I don't know, because I mean, Max Crepeau's in the sticks, and we back him, so I'd be really surprised if he lets in a soft goal, but that's going back now. Someone pointed out that in the last 5 games, I think it is, Canada's allowed goals. I mean, one was the U.S. in November 2019, but they allowed goals against Barbados in back-to-back games in the beginning of 2020. And they've obviously allowed a goal against Bermuda in their last game. The Cayman Islands could sneak one out potentially. Maybe catch Ricardo Ferreira on a half turn. His knee isn't what it used to be. Forgets that. He takes a lunge. The striker hits a shot of dreams right into the top corner. You never know. I personally think it's probably going to be, we'll say, a 6-0. Just Alphonso Davies is going to just run amok in the first half. If he gets rested, Cayman Islands calm things down, and it ends up finishing like that. But I do think Canada's going to score. If Canada doesn't score, like, boy, there would have to be a national inquiry into this game if Canada doesn't score. So I'd say 6-0.
Yeah, I'm gonna go a little more chaotic than you. Even I'm gonna say an 8-1. So Canada's gonna fill the score sheet, but the Cayman Islands are gonna it's gonna be a wonder strike, or it's gonna be an odd deflection or something like that. Yeah, I would think that would be kind of the dream result for everyone. Is Cayman Islands gets a goal, Canada is still heavily favored on the goal differential, and just flipping through the comments here. See a note about Cavallini not in the starting lineup. I do agree that he needs to kind of get off the schneid, so to speak, but I could also definitely see him coming on at halftime and bagging one or two in the second half. I think that's still very much on the table.
Needs it, if anything.
So he definitely needs to see the back of the net. And it was kind of similar with the Whitecaps last year, right? He was a little snake bitten early on. And he's one of those guys that feels very streaky. Like once he sees the back of the net once or twice in competition, then the goals start flowing. But he's not necessarily a guy that jumps out of the gates and scores a ton right away. So this is a continual thing for Lucas. He's just maybe a bit of a slow starter, but then when he gets going, it's a runaway freight train. So I'm not too concerned about it, but it would definitely be nice to see him get one.
He's a streaky scorer though. That's it. You need him to get goals, because then he'll go on these week-long purple patches, and then on the other hand he'll be quiet. But interesting question from Tim. Hat trick for Theo Corbino, and you know what?
Honestly, wouldn't doubt it.
The thing is, with Canada going with these youngsters, they're going to be hungry to prove themselves that they can play at the national team level, to show off. Someone like Liam Miller and Theo Corbino, those two sitting up front, knowing that Alphonso Davies is going to be offering them service, they're going to want to do what they can to bag goals. So yeah, in terms of him wanting to get a hat trick, I think he will. Will he get it? He showed it the other day. He certainly has the skills to. So you know what? That's a very early, bold prediction. I like that one.
That's a good one. Sebastian, I apologize if I copied your score line. I didn't see that, so I can't say that I was taking you as inspiration, but that's interesting to see that we're on this. Exactly. We're on the same wavelength.
But yeah, it's hard to predict exactly the sort of game. I think on Thursday there were a few people on our Twitter. We put it on the Between the Sticks Twitter of predictions. A few had a 4-0, 4-1 scoreline, so they clearly somehow saw the Canadian defensive disaster happening. Maybe maybe there's a bit of one of them called up Milan Borja and said, "Hey, drop a ball. I got good money on you." But jokes aside, it's interesting to see that some people had that sort of prediction come true. So maybe a hat trick for Theo Corbino isn't the boldest it takes. Maybe it's pretty feasible going into this game. But I guess moving on, anything
I've got a question for you, Alex. I think a good one. So probably lots of goals in this one. Who is the least likely player for Canada in the starting lineup to score? Goalkeeper excluded.
Samuel Piet.
That's what I was gonna go with. But
that's what I just realized. Get Sammy P a Canadian goal. Please.
Yeah, that might be like the biggest shout of all. They should, in the second half, you maybe have to start orchestrating things just to find him on the end of a nice through ball or a nice cutback, something like that.
Just the fact that Theo Corbino in 5 minutes scored more goals than Samuel Piet had in 50 caps before. Like, get this guy a goal, please. His teammates love him. He's captaining the side today. It would be nice for him just to bag one, celebrate, kind of. And hey, we can proudly, us two, along with I guess Sebastian, a few others are here, proudly say we saw Samuel Piet's first professional goal. I think it took something like 100 or 200 games, but this year against the Vancouver Whitecaps,
course against the Vancouver Whitecaps,
he scored inevitably a nice little cut back into the far corner.
He looked like a natural goal scorer. It was tidy as you like.
He has it in him, so hopefully we see something like that today. But Sammy P aside, do you have any other shouts for that? It's a good question.
No, I think everyone else I can totally see bagging one. Why not? Absolutely. Offset pieces, I think, organization might be, and coaching could be a problem for the Cayman Islands, especially talking about these are amateurs who, train practice 3-4 times a week. Like it's not a full-time national team job, so I can see organization letting them down, and so the defenders still have a chance to get stuck into the mix off those set pieces.
It's a fair point. And I mean, if you want to talk about players, if we want to talk about individual players, how much damage do you think Alphonso Davies is going to do today? I'm curious to hear some of your thoughts on
Well, so I was just thinking about this. I wonder, like, has Davies almost made a decision that he's not going to score himself? That it's his sole mission to just set up as many of his teammates as possible?
just saying he's 3 assists from the top, like being the I think it was the top assist man in Canadian men's national team history. By the way, he hasn't turned 21 yet, by the way, just to show how absurd that is. I wouldn't put it past him getting 3 assists today and tying that, I think, or breaking or tying that, and very least in contention to break that today. So I'm curious to see how productive he ends up being today, how his teammates latch onto his crosses.
Yeah, I feel like part of him has just decided that he's even if there's a half chance at goal, it's like, no, I'm gonna find the open man. I'm gonna cut it back. I just, those are the kind of vibes I'm getting. He's very committed to being a leader on this team, and part of that is getting everyone involved. And I've been really impressed with what I've seen from him, even though it's just been one match so far. So I'm expecting more of that same role today.
Yeah, well, it's like we mentioned on the last episode, or at least episode 81. It's nice to see him growing into being a star for Canada, accepting the fact that he is the star man. Players on the other team want to play against him. They focus on him. And there's something nice about that swagger he showed on Thursday. He wanted to be the guy. So, I mean, against the Cayman Islands, if he ends up being the guy, it could be devastating. But you just like to see that attitude from him, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, just encourage anyone, if you have questions, comments, ideas about the match you'd like us to touch on, just throw them in the chat. We enjoyed going back and forth with you guys yesterday, and yeah, that's part of what makes this super fun. So if you have any comments or things you want to bring up, let us know.
But yeah, no, I mean, there's a lot of we could do some. Actually, let's return on our predictions from yesterday, because
True.
we didn't talk about that. I mean, boy, I was close there for a second. The 1-1 penalty shootout. I had to go against. We couldn't have both of us being all boring. I think you said, what was it? Like 3-0 can like
I said a 2-1 for Mexico. So I thought that
so you win.
I thought that Canada would bag one, or I was at least hoping that in that last 15-20 minutes that Canada, with some of their subs on, maybe a little freed up, knowing that the match was kind of out of hand, or at least that a result was pretty distant, they'd kind of let it all go and just take some chances on attack, and it didn't really come off. You saw Canada trying to do some things, but they struggled to put it together. One guy I guess if we're going to talk about individual players from yesterday, a guy that I was impressed by was Zach Broguillard, especially like early on in the maybe 25th to 45th minute. He had a period there where he was really involved down the right, and that was something we didn't see all tournament, and I feel like could have really helped Canada out. So I'm glad to see him find a little bit of form, and I think that's a player that, in the national team going forward in a couple of years, that they're going to want to use, because I really rate his abilities. And so it was a shame not to see him more involved, but I was happy that we got a little taste of that yesterday against some pretty good competition.
Yeah, well, I think that brings up another question I have for you, because it's something I looked at yesterday, and obviously I have a few names. Based off of what we saw from 4 games of the Canada U23s, who are some players who you think should be called up for Canada in June now? Looking, say, similar to this camp where you got guys like Theo Corbinu, Liam Miller, younger players, Jaden Nelson kind of filling out the bottom end of the roster. Obviously, a lot of new center backs, fullbacks, et cetera, goalkeepers. Who are some names you think should, and we'll count out Zachary Bogia because he's already been in the national team fold. He's on, he's pretty much in there. Ditto with Derek Cornelius. He's going to be back with the seniors, without a doubt in my mind. But aside from those two, who are some names maybe that Canada fans should keep an eye out for June?
It's a very good question, and it's one I'm going to answer. But a little peek behind the curtain here. I'm going to have to change locations really quick and go to a different room. So Alex is going to carry this for a moment or two, and I'll be right back.
All right, sounds good, Sam. But yeah, for me personally, I do think, like Sebastian mentions, Lucas Diaz has to be a priority. I think for him, kind of similar to Corbinu, what they did here. By he had to file a one-time switch to play in this camp. Corbinu did, so he was already committed to. And 'cause there's a lot of people asking that question: why did Theo Corbinu not? Why was he not in the U23s? And it's a valid question. He could have helped out a lot, but obviously they want to get him cap tied ASAP before Romania considers bringing him in. I don't blame him. But someone like Lucas Diaz, you have to do the same thing with him if you can convince him, because obviously Portugal is going to be after him. He's 18, playing for Sporting's U23s. He's been doing really well at that level. He wants to play for, or at least Portugal will certainly want to get on him, get in terms of bringing him into the fold if he makes the Sporting first team later this year, as might be expected. So for Canada, if you can call Diaz and convince him we need you long term, and to be fair, as a number 10, Scott Arfield isn't getting any younger. Jonathan Osorio, certainly he can play the 8, he can play 6, he can play 10 as well. Lucas Diaz has a role in the national team, especially if he ends up playing at Sporting. He's still so young. So I think Diaz has to be the priority for the next camp, but that's just the easy answer. So looking elsewhere down the roster, I think personally, David Norman Jr. is a very underrated shout. I think he showed a lot at center back today. I thought or not today, sorry, yesterday in the rest of the tournament. If he can get minutes for Cavalry, he's an underrated shout. James Pantemis is certainly in the conversation. Canada has so many goalkeepers, it's hard to consider him. And then maybe elsewhere in the squad, I think as David mentions, Michael Baldissimo has to be in consideration. He's been he's been so good for the Whitecaps last year. He's gonna play a big role this year. He could be a shout for Canada. And then the last two for me, Tajon Buchanan, obvious choice. Canada does actually lack a bit of depth on the wing, surprisingly, at least beyond top end talent. He should earn a nod. But for me, the guy to keep an eye out is Patrick Metcalf. If he can play consistently at either the Whitecaps or at the CPL level and is putting in a shift like he did for Canada's tournament, I wouldn't be surprised if Pat could get some minutes this year with the national team, or at least get a call up and get immersed into that fold. But those are a few for me. Sam is back. He's got
Welcome back.
Ambient music. He's got the lounge, the hotel bar vibes going on now here.
Yeah. I can't take any credit for the decor in here, so I don't want to hear it either way, positive or negative. I didn't catch all of what you said, but did you shout out David Norman Jr. at center back as a potential option for the national team going forward?
Correct.
Yeah, because that's the one, like, okay, Buchanan, sure, Baldy, sure. There's, Pantemi even, like, down the line, definitely an option, although it's more of a stacked group. But I think that, yeah, especially given it's kind of, you got Victoria, you have Cornelius, but other than that, right, like, it's kind of a thin group. I don't know how I feel about Daniil Henry, especially in big matches. Like, it's a bit of a risk. And David Norman Jr. showed a lot other than his capabilities in the air. Tommy Wheeldon Jr. needs to, if he's going to play at center back this year, which I don't know if that's their plan, he might play at the 6. But if Norman Jr. can get a little more comfortable in the air, a little more comfortable in set pieces and stuff like that, he could be a really, really productive center back, and maybe it suits his abilities a little bit more than where we've seen him prior.
Well, that's what I wondered when he was going to go to Miami, if they were actually considering at a center back, because the move just made no sense from a midfield perspective. He wasn't really playing at the Whitecaps level. Miami was bringing in a lot of veterans and whatnot. So you did wonder if they could have used him at center back. They didn't really have any center backs. Obviously, they had LGP eventually, Leandro Gonzalez Perez. But other than that, they were lacking names at center back. So sounds like Tommy Wheeldon Jr. is going to play him as a center back in a back three. He's had a lot of success with his center backs there. Dominic Zator looked obviously really good at both right back and center back. Joel Waterman obviously went from Cavalry up to MLS with Montreal Impact, or as we now know them, CF Montreal. But if he can play,
still getting over that. I'm not used to it.
I'll forever be getting over that one. But in terms of DNG, if he can get minutes, he's already immersed, in the national team fold. He's been for a couple of years. He's played in Toulon and with Canada in the past. He's got that fighting spirit that Canada wants. I think if he's playing regularly with the depth being it is at center back, they will certainly consider him, because if he's a project, someone who's got a lot to grow and less of a finished product, that could be exciting to follow along his development at a brand new position.
Totally. And I don't know. This is something I'm struggling with still thinking about yesterday, and it's something I don't know if Peter Galindo's put out his mailbag piece yet,
He
but
did a few hours ago, or like an hour or
yeah.
two ago.
So I'm not sure if he answered my question or
He did.
okay, there we go. So we're getting all these. I'll have to go take a look at it. But Alex, I'm curious. We've been recording. We were getting in on our Cayman Islands sources, so wasn't able to catch that. But Alex, what did you think about? We talked about this on the last live show. Getting Brim, Bear, Buchanan involved. Like, is it just not playing Diaz enough? Is it having better attacking midfielders? Is it tactics? What went wrong there? Because really, even in the first match, you had like a couple, a great run from Metcalf and then a great finish from Buchanan. And then you had a great finish from Buchanan off a set piece. But like, other than that, there was no build-up play the entire tournament for Canada.
It's a good question. And I think there's almost like this individualistic approach at times. And if you think about it, Canada scored 3 goals all tournament. One was a Tajon Buchanan individual effort. The other was a Tajon Buchanan individual effort. And the other one was a Derek Cornelius team goal with Whitecaps, the Whitecaps connection.
But like still a set piece, not necessarily like a great moment of possession that led to a goal.
Exactly. And I thought a problem all tournament was just Canada's assuredness at making decisive decisions in possession. The only guy who was really consistently doing that was Baldissimo, because even Diaz, as good as he was at getting the ball forward, even at times he lacked, the ability to get the ball to the strikers and play off of him. And to be fair, he had a few moments where he played like Brim, I think in the third game, and Brim just refused to pass it back to him. And Diaz like obviously looked a little miffed at that. But I think it was as much like individual personalities that for some reason, a few of the Canadian attackers had almost this hero-like mentality at times. And, I'd say just someone like Tajon Buchanan, for example, great player. He showed in the first game what he was capable of. But after those first 2 goals, he almost was a bit over-reliant on himself, it felt like, to score. He was getting a little in his own head at times. And I think that's dangerous for Canada. You have to use your teammates. I think the senior national team has done a really good job of being able to attack as a team and set up teammates. And obviously, like you mentioned earlier, having someone like Davies helps that. But I thought it was really tactics, and they had the talent to do it. It wasn't a talent issue. It was more tactics in terms of, for whatever reason, their defensive setup took away from their offensive setup, but also just individual players not making good individual decisions, at least, going into the final third. Because I thought, again, Metcalf, Baldissimo making good decisions, playing out of the back, they mostly made good decisions. But whatever reason, when it came to the final third, Canada could do no right.
I guess so. Continuing off of that, what can we hope for or expect from this U23 setup going forward, like in terms of the way Canada Soccer is going to attack or approach that age group? Like, are we going to see more exhibition tournaments and exhibition friendlies and matches at the under 23 level? Like, this is all kind of new territory. What do you think we can expect over the next couple of years, and how are they going to try to, develop this program so that there's better results in 4 years' time?
Well, I don't work for the CSA. So
well, yes, but if you're...
I have ideas.
What can you anticipate? I know you've always got ideas cooked up and running around in the back of your head, so I'm curious to kind of pick your brain on that front.
Well, that's it. I have ideas, and I think the number one priority is for Canada to lean into their domestic-based U23s. I saw it on Twitter a few times yesterday, but the fact of the matter is, Canada now, they're out of the Olympics for this year. That doesn't mean you can't start preparing for the next Olympic cycle. And I was having this discussion with some friends yesterday, when we're just after the game, completely, off the record. But one thing I've noticed about Olympic qualifiers around the world is that it's really a domestic based approach. It's really whoever has the best players playing in their own continent. So you look at Europe, for example, right now they're hosting U21 Euros, which also serve as qualifiers for the Olympics. You look at, say, France's team as an example for U21s. They got Eduardo Camavinga, Jules Koundé, Eduardo, Tim Mesley, who's playing for Lille, or not Lille, sorry, Leeds, sorry, that is their starting goalie for Leeds, and Jonathan Akone, or I think it was Akone or Bamba, one of the two. Just the sort of depth they had is absurd. They have obviously strong, French players playing all over Europe. Ditto for other programs. It's not just France. I'm using them as an example because I know them. That extends to CONCACAF. What teams have historically done the best in CONCACAF? Mexico and Honduras. They have strong national domestic leagues where they have a lot of local players playing. They get players together for camps. That makes a huge difference. And I think that's something not only where Canada's lag behind, but the US. So I think if you're Canada starting next year, like starting in December this year, you got to get your 2001s and later starting to get together. Because yes, there'll be a few. Say you bring in Jaden Nelson and in 2 years he goes to Europe and he won't be available for qualifiers down the road. So be it. But a lot of these guys, especially CPLers and other 01 borns, they might not make that move to Europe. Not everyone makes that move to Europe. They'll be available. And if you start working with them now, building a platform, getting them integrated in the squad by having these yearly camps where you play exhibition games against university teams or something against that of that likes, that could be a huge difference maker in terms of assuring that Canada's ready at the 2024 qualifiers. Because at this tournament, most of these guys hadn't played together, be it even at the U20 level and the U18 level. And that's a whole other story about how Canada should maybe streamline talent from those pools up to the U23s. But the fact of the matter is not a lot of these guys prepared together. So if you're Canada, you have to make that something that isn't so obvious when they play in 2024.
Well, Morrow talked a lot throughout all of his availability throughout this tournament about the level of integration they wanted from this U23 team to the first team, the national team. So hopefully they're also looking further down the pipeline at those younger age groups and how to make it all integrate. And I think the biggest part of all of this is that now you have a reference point. You have a group of U23s that's played together in a tournament. They've achieved a certain level of results. There's going to be guys like Diaz that are eligible at least to return and can bring that experience, or younger players coming up can talk to a guy like Derek Cornelius, talk to a guy like David Norman Jr., share experiences, share, whatever has gone on, little tips and tricks of the trade playing in CONCACAF, and can kind of figure all of that out. So I'm excited for what's in store, and you need that initial reference point to really kind of evolve things in the right way.
Well, that's it. You gotta, it's all about building for the future. It's cycles. It's all things like World Cup qualifying. It's a cycle. Olympic qualifying. It's a cycle. You've got to prepare for cycles, and especially in U23s where the cycle changes every 4 years, you got to get ready with the next generation as soon as possible. So I think it absolutely has to be a priority. But nearing the end of the show today, again, thanks for everyone for joining us. But good question from Caleb from a Whitecaps and Canada national team crossover. Who should be the next reasonable Canada national team target for the Whitecaps? Sam, do you have any initial names right off the bat?
Are we talking like guys from the U23 squad or guys from the national team? Is it open to both?
All of the above.
It's like, I guess the caveat is like within a reasonable price frame, because like someone like Eustachio, for example, is obviously well beyond the reach of a team like the Whitecaps at this point. Yeah, I'm gonna have to think about that one a little bit. You had to give me a moment here, Alex. Any names that just pop off to you right away?
Well, I guess you just have to look at it for priorities. What do the Whitecaps need? They don't need a goalkeeper, so we'll slash that off the list. They don't need center back, so we'll slash that off the list. Fullbacks, I guess they signed fullbacks now. So maybe a month or two ago, you could have said, maybe one of the many right backs Canada do have as potential call-ups, but obviously they don't need a fullback. So it'd have to be someone who can either play in the midfield or up front. So that I do wonder, can they get, that's tough, because I would say it would be someone like Liam Miller be a realistic get, but he's on a trajectory where he looks like he's going to be making his way up after this strong load performance and playing for Charlton Athletic in League One. So maybe not Liam Miller, but again, do you consider someone like Scott Arfield, realistic, as Ben mentions in the comments?
This is why I struggled, because it seems like there's a massive gulf between either guys they don't necessarily need or guys that wouldn't be massively better than players they already have at that position. And then there's all the guys you want that are
like too
possibly
good.
slightly out of reach, and just their career ambitions take them elsewhere. So a guy that I guess a guy that I've brought up before and maybe bring up again is, if and when Ali Adnan moves on, or if and when Bruno Gaspar goes elsewhere, Jake Nowinski's on a different team, whatever, I still think there's a chance that Sam Adekubi comes back and plays in Vancouver again at some point.
Well, yeah,
He's left that door open. He hasn't slammed it shut, and he's got that right mix of enough quality but not too much where the MLS in today's day and age would still make sense for him. So I think that's just fit wise, that might be the best. That's maybe not the most exciting suggestion of all time, but if I'm trying to be realistic about it, I feel like that's a good shout.
well, that's it. It's like, say someone like Mark Anthony Kay would be a massive get for the Whitecaps, and it's realistic in the sense that he seems to want to stay in MLS, but he seems settled at LA. He's playing for a good club. Just the amount of jam and TAM and all that to pull that off would just be, quite tough to pull off a trade like that. So you'd probably have to rule him off the list. So again, it's Canada's national team is just a mix of young guys playing in Europe that are too good, or older guys in Europe, to guys in MLS who are a little harder to reach. I think, to be fair, a year ago, a guy I would have considered before Daniel Bikel was brought in is Samuel Piet. I thought he was kind of, with the whole acquisition of Wanyama and all that, you did wonder, was he going to play? But obviously he features into Montreal's plans. That isn't realistic. But I always thought Samuel Piet could have been a potentially realistic name to look at as well.
Yeah, there's always the guys in league in terms of MLS that are definitely options, but we hear this time and time again from guys like our friend Tom Bogert. Moving players within MLS is
Hard.
obscenely complicated. So that always, sometimes you're better off, going to the Uruguayan second division to find someone. Somehow that ends up being easier than transferring for someone within MLS.
Yeah, well, I think on that note, the game starts in like 5 minutes. So unless there's any last questions that are pressing questions that are being asked, obviously the game is on One Soccer. For those asking for a link, I frankly don't know if there's any sort of stream for this game. I mean, possible.
Well, I wonder what I would encourage people to look into is what, if anything, is the Cayman Islands FA doing in terms of broadcast coverage. So maybe that's an avenue that's available. I don't know.
Well, because a lot of CONCACAF nations have been streaming their games to their national television services on YouTube or on Facebook. So it could be, a potential avenue for games, really, if you can find or anything like that. I'm just seeing if there's, maybe I'll go on Twitter. I'll find the old reliable John Arnold of the CONCACAF expert. He's been sharing some very good streams across the past few days. So if there are any, I'll share, but if not, I have no streams. I've got the I've got the My One Soccer subscription. I know most of you do, but hey, if there are links you want to help out people in the chat, you guys do you. I'm gonna be watching on One Soccer. Got to support the national broadcaster, but if not, I think it's like $6 for today. So if you don't want to have a hamburger later today, it's the same price as a hamburger. So
yeah, and quick shameless self promotion. If you haven't checked out the little podcast we did with our guests from the Cayman Islands, throw that on in the background during the match if you're interested, or if it's 6-0 and you're getting a little bit bored. Go ahead, throw that on, learn a little bit more about the domestic Cayman Islands football setup. I certainly learned a lot. There's also a couple video clips, the one in terms of COVID testing, another one that I put out recently, with 2 players to watch, a center back and a striker, that are the talisman of the Cayman Islands squad. So if you want to get super into your Cayman Islands scouting, you can check those clips out.
All right. Well, I guess on that note, thanks again for joining us. Again, it was great to see that so many people popped in and chatted Canadian soccer. Again, we're going to do more of these in the future. Obviously, you guys have shown some great interest, and we're very happy that you've enjoyed this. We're going to be doing a lot of Whitecaps stuff as well, future Canadian, men's and women's national team games, whatever Canadian soccer there is. So again, if you liked it, feel free to let us know. It always does help to know that people are listening and are enjoying this content. Obviously, some of you guys have been saying it in the chat, and we appreciate your kind words. I mean, otherwise, we're working on improving the quality of these shows. Obviously, it's just more of, kind of a dry run, having some fun chatting. We're gonna, try to work on getting some graphics in and making it a little more, a little nicer, a little whatnot. But it was just fun to have a good chat about Canadian soccer.
Yeah, you got to start from the bottom, right? So we just want to give you this raw, unedited perspective of our thoughts, and yeah, maybe we'll jazz it up with a little more technical prowess as time goes on, leading into the Whitecaps regular season. But for now, thanks for listening, everyone, and yeah, enjoy the match. Hopefully, Canada can bag some goals.
And again, like Ben says, we might do a post-game show. We won't leave the door, we won't leave the door closed. If today's game is earlier, so again, if there's interest for a post-game show, we might just have to do it. But if not, we'll see you definitely again soon with